President Duterte says he is seriously considering running for the vice presidency in next year's elections. However, the president says that his successor should be one of his friends. Otherwise, he would be a, quote, inutile thing.
If I run for vice president, tapos ang presidenteng na-elect, hindi ko kaibigan, the situation would arise na sabi ko, I would remain an inutile thing there. Kasi pag wala kang sa presidente, pagsuporta, wala ka talaga. Ito ang dilema ko.
PDP Laban Executive Vice Chairman Senator Coco Pimentel has acknowledged the rift within the ruling political party, saying there appears to be two factions.
Inaatake ka, tapos with the statement of Pacquiao that triple, double ang corruption. Uminit yung ulo ko. I remember he has a tax evasion case. Kung corrupt kami, ikaw, when you cheat government, you are a corrupt official. Lalo na.
One of the framers of the 87 Constitution, Attorney Christian MONSOD, said he's willing to file a complaint should President Duterte run for Vice President in 2022. He says a president's candidacy as Vice President can serve as backdoor to another term. Is the President's plan a violation of the Constitution? We will discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this edition of The Chiefs. I'm Robbie Alampay, also with us online, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5, and Ed Lingao of One News. Chiefs, good evening.
Hello, Robbie.
Good evening. Happy Thursday.
We have a very important topic and very important guest, but I'm sure you don't mind if I take a moment here to acknowledge the loss of one of our colleagues, a very good man, Nonoy Espina, former chairman of the NUJP, a very strong, very committed, very consistent champion of press freedom, safety of journalists here in the Philippines. One of our kasama ko nung tinayo natin yung interaksyon, Luchi, si Nonoy Espina.
I know, yes.
Yeah, so
Sad.
yeah, a lot of people are sad, but he also leaves behind a strong legacy with NUJP and also the Philippine Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. Si Nonoy was one of the key people that needs to be credited for putting that in place. So nakikiramay po tayo sa pamilya ni Nonoy Espina sa NUJP at sa lahat ng periodistang kinalulungkot ang pagpanaw niya, but we do celebrate his life and legacy as well. Now, let's begin with Attorney Christian MONSOD, one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Good evening, Mr. MONSOD.
Good evening.
Good evening, Attorney MONSOD.
Sir, by this time, everybody knows why we want to have this conversation with you. This came up months ago. We've asked many lawyers about it. There have been differences in opinion as to whether or not it is constitutional for a sitting president to run for vice president. So I think people know that. I want to start with this question. When the Constitution was being drafted, was this just a scenario that was not anticipated, or was it anticipated? Because people are asking, if it were clearer in the Constitution, maybe we wouldn't have this debate. Was it an anticipated scenario?
Well, we don't know yung provision na yan. The 6-year term is a compromise because under the 1935 Constitution, the president could stay for 8 consecutive years. Kaya yung unang draft ng provision na yan, sinabi na 6 years is the term of the president and he shall be disqualified from immediate re-election. Binago yan in the course of the discussions, naging shall be ineligible for any re-election.
Okay.
Any re-election. Yun. So, of course, if you read the proceedings, many personal opinions were expressed by the members of the commission. But the interpretation was never put to a vote because to many of us, it was clear. When the constitutional provision says the president shall not be eligible for any re-election, and that's section 4 of Article 7 talks of a 6-year term. Now, it says shall not be eligible for any re-election. That means he can only have one shot at the presidency with a 6-year term. Correct? Because he can never again be elected as president. Now, the issue arises, what if the president runs for election as a vice president? No? And if something happens to the vice president, it dies, impeached, disabled, or resigns, mandatory under the Constitution that the vice president succeeds in the vacancy.
Right.
No, the problem I think arises because as we see it now, the vacancy seems to be a planned thing. That's the plan for the vacancy to be created. And how, somehow we get that from the news that the president is considering it, and that he is the one who will choose who will be the candidate for president. This is the first time I've heard that it's the vice president who chooses the candidate for president. Correct?
Yes.
That means there is a plan here. There's a motive because directly he cannot run for president. And this is a backdoor to succeeding to the presidency. So the question is, can he do that? Right? Well, the principle, of course, is you cannot do indirectly what you can do. You're not allowed to do directly. But you have to interpret that provision. Is he eligible for re-election? That means one term. Kasi when we were discussing it was a compromise, di ba? 4 and 4 before. Sabi natin, well, why don't we make it 6, but no re-election? In other words, limited to one term of 6 years. The only instance, the only exception where a president can serve for more than 6 years is the case of Arroyo, because that's explicitly provided in the Constitution, that if the vice president becomes president for less than 4 years, then he can run for election for president. And that's what happened, 10 years. But that is the only exception. And it's explicitly in the Constitution, in the provision.
Attorney, the supporters of those who are pushing the President Duterte to run, sabi naman nila, there is a prohibition on re-election but not on succession. Tama ba yung argument na yon?
Well, you have to read that provision nga eh. That provision of ineligible means he has only one shot at 6 years and a maximum of 6 years because the term is 6 years. Now, any other way to do it by succession or what is a backdoor to holding the office of the president more than 6 years, and there is only one exception to that.
Pero if there's no express prohibition in the Constitution on the backdoor, pwede
No,
ba-
but you have to read the provision and interpret it. You know, when you're interpreting the Constitution, you cannot just discuss in isolation a provision of the Constitution. When you're interpreting it, you have to look at the whole Constitution. What is the goal? What is the direction of the Constitution? And the term limits on president, vice president, senators, congressmen, and so on and so forth, is a social justice provision of the Constitution. And as the president of the Constitutional Commission said, Justice Munoz Palma, she said the heart of this Constitution, the central theme of this Constitution is social justice. Now, what does social justice mean? Well, social justice, Article 13, Section 1, is to reduce social, economic, and political inequalities, remove cultural inequities, and this is key phrase, by equitably diffusing wealth and political power for the common good. All right? Now, when you talk about our government, there are three great departments: the legislative, judiciary, and executive. The legislative and judiciary are collegial bodies. It's collective power. The executive is one person, the president. That's why he has vast powers. That is why in the Constitution, we were very explicit on what are the limits. How do you avoid abuse of that power? Like in declaring martial law, di ba? Sufficiency of factual basis issue. And in the case of the term limit intended by the Constitution is 1 term for the president, 2 terms for the vice president, 2 terms of 6 years for senators, 3 terms of 3 years for congressmen and local government officials. So if he occupies the office beyond the 6 years, he is violating the intent and spirit of the Constitution.
Well, but as Robbie says, no, the opinion seems to be divided on that.
Of course.
Yes. So I guess the next logical question is, what happens if he runs? What can actually stop him?
Well, actually, if there is, in October is the filing of certificate of candidacy, then maybe there's already an issue. But the first step is the COMELEC. The COMELEC will have to decide whether he's qualified or not. And then those who do not agree with the COMELEC's decision, whatever it is, will certainly go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will eventually have to interpret that provision.
Is it true that you're willing to file it if nobody files
I didn't
it?
quite say it that way. I said, you know, the Supreme Court is sometimes very strict on what they call, you know, do you have a standing in the court? That's why I expect that the other presidential candidates, one of them is probably going to raise the issue of the president. If no one files, I'm willing to file. But I expect that there will be people with a quote unquote valid interest in the outcome who will file the case.
Sir, two things there. On challenging a potential actual filing by President Duterte, that can only come after October.
Yes.
Hindi pa? So that
Yes.
there will be nothing to challenge until he actually files. On the other hand,
Correct.
yung COMELEC making it clear. Can COMELEC make that do that motu proprio, or do they also?
That's really the process. That's the process, because the COMELEC has the power to disqualify those aspiring for elective office. It happened in the case of Estrada in 2010.
Okay, but
yeah.
if we try to see it to its logical end, I mean, COMELEC will probably decide by December, which is the deadline for filing, and then the campaign begins in earnest. And as we know, even if somebody does file a case in the Supreme Court, it's going to be a long litigation. What if it already happens and he wins and he becomes the vice president? And then even, you know, let's just assume, and I hope this doesn't happen, that something does happen to the president and he becomes president and there is no decision yet. You know, in other words, is there any room for reversing the process and correcting it?
No, it's like this. In the case of Estrada, I think the appeal to the Supreme Court was made just a few days before the election. And the Supreme Court took it up after the election and said that the issue is moot and academic. But the Supreme Court has not yet interpreted that provision.
Okay.
But the COMELEC allowed him to run. The Supreme Court, did not or was not able to decide on time,
Right.
and said it was moot and academic. But this time, I think the Supreme Court, the COMELEC and the Supreme Court should make decisions for the sake of the public. that the public should know whether he is qualified or not to run.
Pero the Supreme Court cannot be compelled to act faster, no?
Well, you can file a
There's no
motion.
way.
You can file, but many people are quite cynical about the Supreme Court because
Yeah.
Yes.
if you look at the history of the Supreme Court, although there's been changes, constant changes, they have deferred to the president 5 times
Yes.
on 5 issues, and of course they say, well, you can expect them to defer to the president. I believe that the Supreme Court has its golden moments. And one golden moment was when the Supreme Court struck down the pirma of Ramos,
Yeah.
when he wanted to extend his term. The Supreme Court struck down Arroyo's Sigaw ng Bayan, right? When Arroyo was still president. And the 10 justices appointed by Arroyo voted 5 and 5 in an 8-7 vote.
And
So
it
it has its golden moment, and I always hope and pray for the golden moment.
Ed, I can see you're trying to ask a question. May technical problem kaya Ed. Can we hear you now? Ed? Wala, may problema yata sa audio ni... No.
There is no audio.
In the meantime, habang inaantay po natin si Ed.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're reading a plan into this, I want to again bring it a step further. What exactly is the plan? Does this have to do with evading cases that will probably be filed against him once he steps down?
Well, I cannot speculate on that, no. But from the way he's talking, it's very different from what he was saying before, where he said he would step down at the end of his term. And I interpret that to mean that he will not run for office, particularly higher office, once he stepped down. And then when you talk to the several cabinet members who are, the good people in government, well, he says he's getting old, he's sick, and he's tired.
Yeah.
So this is a new development.
Yeah, sir, I don't know, Luci, Ami, if I remember this right, I think it was Senator Drilon who said that, regardless of where we stand and everything that we're thinking, the reality is, given the pragmatics and the realities of politics and how things work in the Philippines, he said the only thing really standing in the way of President Duterte running for vice president is his own respect for the Constitution. Your thought on that, sir?
Well, I think Drilon makes a good point about that. But we have a system of checks and balances. And I think that the institutions that are part of that system must act independently and according to their conscience. That's how democracy will survive. If whoever it is who's making the decision decides on the basis of fear or favor, then our democracy is in peril.
Yeah.
Attorney, you've heard him also talk only fairly recently, no? He also said na posturing lang tong pagba-vice president ko, pagbibigyan ko na lang yung mga para matahimik na muna yung mga yan at hindi ako ma-lame duck. Do you actually, what do you believe sa kanya? Ano yung mas matinding?
Well, I think, I think as we have learned the past 5 years, we cannot literally accept everything that he says.
Yes.
He changes his mind. He says it from another perspective. And the press secretary and the people in Malacanang always come back and says, this is what he meant to say.
Yes.
This happens all the time. So I will not take literally anything he is saying at this time. It is how he moves. What is he going to do, right?
In any case, even if you take Duterte out of the picture, and we take the scenario out of the context of Rodrigo Duterte himself, obviously this is an important topic that we need to confront as a country sooner or later. Because even if he ends up not running for vice president, he's already opened up this potential can of worms. If not for him, for any politician who makes it to the presidency in the future.
Correct. I think that the question of president is very important. You know, if the Supreme Court establishes a precedent that opens a back door against the spirit and intent of this Constitution, then we have a problem in our hands in the future. Because can you imagine, he can stay for 12 years. The previous maximum was 8 years, right? The vice president is 12 years because the vice president is just a contingency and so on. And everybody has a term limit.
Yep.
And I think that if we open this back door, as you said, I agree with you, it opens the back door to this. Every president will try to serve for 12 years.
Yeah, but actually, sir, I wanted to add this. No, this is one of the things I was discussing with a lawyer friend. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. But I was saying it's not a backdoor to a 12-year presidency. It's a backdoor to a presidency for life, because if you're president, then you run for vice president on the argument that it's a different position, and then you rise to the level of president again. You can then invoke the precedent of Gloria Arroyo and say that I was not elected as president. I carried over less than 3 years of the presidency to which I succeeded, and therefore I have another 3 years, and then run for vice president again ad nauseum.
Yeah, but in the case of Arroyo is an exception that's explicit in the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's different.
But there's, I mean, the politicians can find a way. My question is, if President Duterte does not run, and well, of course, then there won't be any supposed violation. Is there a way to correct this provision so that it clarifies exactly the intent of the original framers?
Yeah.
Well,
And what would that way be?
Well, if you want to amend something in the Constitution, you can do it either by
Charter
Constituent Assembly, by convention,
so we
by
go back to
people's
that,
initiative. You go back to that. But I don't think it's necessary to explicitly say it, because as I said, if you read the provision exactly, the intent is one term.
Yeah. So are we saying that you can actually cure it or mitigate against it on the level of the COMELEC?
Oh, no, but all the COMELEC decision is always appealable to the Supreme Court. And that will end up there in the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Right? It's really interesting how you interpret that sentence for any re-election. What is the other side of that coin? There is a prohibition on staying in office beyond 6 years.
Okay. What about the argument of, the supporters of the president that it's a democracy and we should just let the people decide?
Yeah, but why then take away the power of disqualification of the COMELEC? Just let everybody run. Right? I mean, if you're saying let the people decide every time that there is an issue like this, then why does the COMELEC still disqualify? Just let everybody run who wants to file. Secret certificate of candidacy.
Sir,
Ed, finally, yeah.
Pero sir, but by February next year, all the COMELEC commissioners would have been appointed by President Duterte. At the same time, by next year, 13 of the 15 Supreme Court justices would have been appointed by President Duterte. So if that is the only possible resolution to this problem would be going to those two bodies, how do you view the chances of getting it done?
But this is what I'm saying. There is a history. There are cases where the Supreme Court had golden moments. It didn't make a difference that Arroyo appointed 10 justices of the 15 justices and still lost Sigaw ng Bayan. Or that in the case of Hacienda Luisita, Pinoy was a sitting president and he lost the case. Hacienda Luisita lost the case on a 13-0 vote, including the 3 justices he appointed. Correct?
if the Supreme Court, okay, if the whatever the decision of the Supreme Court is, would that be ultimately final, or it can still be reversed?
No, it's fine. And as far as this case is concerned, it becomes already jurisprudence unless it is reversed.
But will it be set
Well,
off again
by
by
the way-
another candidate who wants to
Yeah,
do it and
by the-
challenge it again?
By
Yeah.
the way, the Supreme Court can reverse itself, and the only power in government that can reverse a Supreme Court decision is the legislature by enacting a law that's against the jurisprudence. So that's the system of checks and balances in our country. It must work. I think all the government officials that might be involved here must realize the consequences and the implications of their decisions on the future of democracy in our country.
In case the president runs for vice president, can and someone challenges it, can the petition include the case of ERAP running for a second, a new term? Kasi iba
Well,
yung he ran for president eh. This one is running for vice president.
Well, if, you know, the decision of the Supreme Court, the decision of the the second division of the Comelec was that, first of all, Estrada did not finish his term. Correct?
Yes.
Secondly, they said, moreover, and more important, he is not an incumbent president, and therefore he doesn't have the vast powers of an incumbent president. That has implications, that statement, correct?
Yes.
That an incumbent president has these vast powers.
So it can be mentioned, that case, no? If you're
Well,
going
we don't need to mention it because it's been the Supreme Court did not rule on it.
yes, it's unresolved. Pwede siyang isama dun sa petition if you're going to challenge Duterte running for vice president.
No, because that's a different situation. It was a president running for re-election because he did not finish his term.
Yes.
And then there's the issue of the pardon.
So hindi pwede
Di ba? Oh, there was issue na may nagsasabi na no, hindi tama yung pardon, but he was really pardoned and restored his civil and political right. Then they said, well, you know, but he said he will not run. And of course, if you look at what he said that at the time he was not thinking of it or something like that. You know, it's,
Sir, can I ask you a constitutional hypothetical?
okay.
Could supporters of the president argue that if a sitting president is barred from running for VP because he could become president, then couldn't they also argue that the sitting president should also be barred from running for a seat in the Senate? Because the Senate president, if he becomes a Senate president, is third in line.
No,
Or
because-
congressman. Because
It's collegial nga raw. Yeah.
You know, kasi the Section 4 is about the presidency. But there is no prohibition on running for other office. Right?
Yes,
There
sir.
is none.
Okay,
He
what
ran for,
if-
like
Yeah.
what Arroyo did, ran for Congress.
Yeah. Right.
And those are all collegial bodies.
Sir, so what if the Supreme Court rules on the case when he's already the vice president? Will he be disqualified then? Will he be
Well, I don't
impeached?
know.
Or
I think many
what
people will,
happens then?
I think many people will speculate that they might say the people have spoken.
Yun na nga.
And sir, that to bring up the question of impeachment. Would he need to be impeached
Yeah,
if he was sworn into office? Or could he be removed by the Supreme Court?
No, not the Supreme Court cannot remove a president. The impeachment process is Congress.
First.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I mean, if he runs and wins as vice president, could he be removed by the Supreme Court when it finally decides on whether or not he could have run for vice president, or whether it would necessarily be?
Well, it's possible. It's possible. In fact, it's possible for the Supreme Court to say at this time or by October that the issue should be brought up if and when he assumes or tries to assume the presidency because the president resigns, then there is an issue whether he can succeed despite the prohibition implied that he can serve only one term. He can occupy the office only for a maximum of 6 years.
Oh, ang gulo
Okay.
dito pagka
Diba?
Get proposal next
Talagang
year.
kailangan yung
this will be messy.
Yeah, it's a really messy thing. Maybe the president should not often say, I don't want to mess up our democracy.
Yeah, but the other scenario there is the president assuming in the scenario that the president who wins is the running mate of the then future vice president Rodrigo Duterte. Another scenario is nobody steps down; he just becomes de facto president, where you have a figurehead.
You can also have somebody else elected president. He is vice president.
Yes, and it is a scenario that he himself has said today. He does dread that other scenario. He did say, in fairness to President Duterte, don't overlook the fact that I might get elected as vice president under a president that is not my ally.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, all of these scenarios may mean that Supreme Court will say, let's decide that at the proper time.
Okay. Well, until then, we're very happy to always have you here, Attorney MONSOD, for these scenarios
sir.
and your analysis and your insights. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
We need to take a break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs here on One News. Now joining us is Major General Restituto Padilla, spokesperson for the National Task Force Against COVID-19. Good evening, General Padilla.
Good evening, General.
Good evening, Robbie. Good evening, Lucy. Good evening, Ami. Good evening, Ed. Good evening to all our televiewers and those following the program.
And General, many people are following our recent conversations because ang pinag-uusapan ngayon, interzonal travel. People are quite eager not just to go, but to, first of all, understand ano na ba yung policy. Now, yesterday we were talking to Health Secretary Duque, and he was acknowledging the complaints of LGUs, but he was also saying, look, ito yung dilemma. Paano yung mga vaccination cards? Di rin naman natin alam kung if we can vouch for that. And as we discuss it, we realize actually it goes all the way back to the basic need for a database, for interoperable systems between LGUs so that there is one national center that can vouch for any card out there. And our question to him, and we'll start off with that question to you, why are we still discussing this? Bakit wala yung database na yun? Bakit wala yung interoperable one center na ganon that will allow all of these things and that will open up these possibilities finally for whether it's interzonal travel, for lifting quarantines, for allowing tourism, and so on?
Thank you, Robbie. Actually, the DICT is still working on it. There are still bugs, I think, in the system that they have created. So until such time that the DICT is confident enough to make that a reliable platform where everybody can check on the vaccination of individuals, then I guess that's the only time that we can have the interoperable database that where local governments can check. And apparently that's actually the same case with international travelers. So the reason why we created this shortened quarantine for those in the green list countries was that the cases in these countries were not putting the Philippines at risk of getting the new variant. But unfortunately, since we don't have access to the databases of other countries and people coming in with their vaccination cards and validating this vaccination card, we cannot yet, as of yet, still allow them for shortened quarantine because of this lack of our ability to counter-check and authenticate. So on the local front, apparently that's the same case. So I hope the ICT will be able to come up with a platform soon and make this accessible to the LGU so that we can get our vaccination card as our, well, quote-unquote, passports to travel to other areas on an interzonal basis. And I cannot blame the LGUs at this time. We do understand the plight of some areas, particularly those that are still experiencing some sort of surge, because the local chief executives are actually the ones who really know the situation on the ground. And they really need to take the lead in putting up measures and steps in order to control the spread of the virus in their area. So I will probably say that our IATF cabinet members are also considering that and respecting the local chief executive desire to be able to control the surge in their area.
Yes, sir. But do we have a clear timetable as to when this database will be operational? Kahit man lang target dates with milestones.
Well, Ed, honestly, I don't know, but the order has been given to expedite it. I think there were some dry runs that were conducted already, but as I mentioned earlier, the bugs are still there. So let me check and I'll get back to you with the final date if the ICT has a target date already.
End of
General,
July.
do we have any idea what kind of bugs these are? Because, I mean, everybody's been conducting their lives online already. And, you know, there have been so many new apps and programs that enable us to do things online. No? Halimbawa, yung banking system, mabilis, di ba? Ngayon, talagang cashless na lahat, even shopping. So we find it hard to believe that you know, the very job of an IATF, it's a very critical function of government now to really create that database and allow us to monitor. No? Still has yet to be done. So I just want to know what bugs those are.
I think the main challenge lies on the various platforms that are used by the LGUs, because we don't have a common platform for registration. LGUs are using their own registration system. Quezon City's registration system was actually provided by CLIG, and I think they did discontinue that and had another provider for Taguig, which is very reliable. I have not heard of any failure, but this is where the rollout, I guess, is best practice because it's very efficient. Similarly with other LGUs that have not experienced any kind of problems regarding registration and notification of vaccinees. But in other areas, it's different. Those who don't have the money to pay for providers, they still do it manually, unfortunately. So I think there lies the challenge of the ICT.
Sir, do you have an idea on what proportion that is? I mean, kasi kahapon na sinabi ni Secretary Duque, hindi, nag-ano na tayo, inuumpisahan na nga yung encoding. In fact, mga 3 million na of X million. No? But, you know, I hope we didn't jump to conclusions, but inevitably, when you mentioned encoding, you know, I associate it with that word that you used, na manual. Diba? But at the same time, we also know that anybody who has gotten their shots signed on a website, or at least most people I know, and even if you walk up, I imagine that there's some kind of computer terminal there where somebody's taking down your... The point is, isn't it by definition that if you've gotten your shots, that your information, one way or the other, has already been captured in some digital database, kahit hindi interoperable?
there is a central database that captures all of the vaccinees' records.
Yeah.
That's true. And it is the one architecture that was created by DICT. So in order to make that structure, I'm not an electronic or a data or a software engineer or an electronic geek, but the way I understood it is that we need to link up the platform so that the daily cases of or the daily vaccination records that are being inputted in the system can be captured real time. And if indeed these people travel, they can be on the database immediately. So apparently, those are the challenges that are being fixed. So let's give them time to fix that. And hopefully, before we get to a level of number of inoculees or vaccinees that have done their 2 doses, nasa 4% pa lang tayo ngayon eh, more than 4%. So hopefully by 5, 6, 7%, medyo okay na sana yung system nila.
Ito bang database nyo, you intend to link it with the database on contact tracing? Kasi napakasama ng contact tracing natin. I think it's almost non-existent. If you try that, stay safe, you can put any information there without verification by the government.
Yeah. I don't think it's linked to the contact tracing, Ami. I'm not privy to that arrangement, but based on what I hear from the geeks working on it, I think it's an independent, really for vaccination database.
Now, sir, let's move forward on our starting point, why we got to discussing data and databases and so on, which is moving forward, how do we open up interzonal travel and how do we open up business and the economy in general if we essentially have no ID or documentation that can be vouched for by some central database? What's the way forward here in the meantime?
Well, the positive side, Robbie, that I can perhaps share, or you may have heard it already, is that the private sector is very aggressive and very proactive. They're talking about micro bubbles that are creating their own herd immunity in their workplaces because they're very proactive and aggressively pursuing vaccination of their workers. So they can declare certain bubbles within certain workspaces as a micro bubble where everyone is already vaccinated and they can ease up on that. But for travel generally, we really need a central database to allow for the LGUs to counter-check so that they can free up the movement. But the main contributors to the GDP actually is the NCR plus and its adjacent areas. So the best thing to do, in my observation, is to concentrate on that. That's why our experts recommended to concentrate most of the vaccines earlier on in this area so that we can create that people protection or population protection that we have been talking about. So once we have created that, hopefully the virus won't escape to the other nearby areas and we can contain it and we can allow for easing in these areas to allow for a more robust opening of the economy so that we can support all the rest of the country.
You actually think what's the sense now within the groups that are in charge of the pandemic response? Kasi today there was a warning from the World Health Organization cautioning the world against quick easing of restrictions amid the vaccine rollout. Kasi nandiyan pa daw yung Delta variant, may naglalabasan daw na ibang variant, and we are seeing even the highly vaccinated economies daw, we are seeing an increase in infections. So what's the sense now in our government? Are you actually thinking of speeding up reopening, economic reopening?
Ami, thank you for asking that question. Actually, very cautious ang IATF. We learned our lesson earlier in the year. Nung medyo naging aggressive sa pag-open, nakita natin nagkaroon ng incident of surges nung March, and then April, nakita natin yung spike. So we don't want to repeat those kinds of mistakes. That's the sensing I get from our teams who are looking into this. So a gradual opening, a very cautious opening, very carefully and deliberately thought of, I guess it's the direction. Kaya nga, yung movement ng tao, maski pa paano, nakikita natin nagno-normalize, but still, we impose some heightened restrictions in some areas. So these restrictions, I guess, if I am to be asked, will remain because the experts are actually putting on the brakes for expedited opening so that we can more or less be able to manage and not allow our health system to get overwhelmed in case of any spike. So those are the key areas actually that we have to be prepared for. And more than anything else, we have to protect our borders for any entry of the variant. Because right now, safe to say, and knock on wood and God forbid, that there will be a spread of the new variant and other mutations. Because there's another mutation that's being watched right now, the Lambda variant, discussed na ng DOH. So binabantayan na ito. So hopefully, hindi makapasok yung mga bagong mutations na ito sa mga lugar natin.
In terms of protecting the borders, particularly from international, on the level of international travel, are there new protocols or old protocols that need to be brought back?
Well, not at the moment. The easing actually happened for those who have validated vaccine cards to shorten their length of quarantine, and especially those in the green list of countries that I mentioned earlier on. But for those whose cases are still high and do not appear on the green list, I guess they will have to be subjected to the regular protocol that we started with, which is 10 days facility quarantine, testing on the 7th day. And if they test negative, they are released on the 10th day and made to finish their 14-day quarantine in their homes. So I think that will still stay for the moment until such time that the experts panel working on these things decide and recommend otherwise to the IATF.
Sir, balik tayo dun sa ano lang ha, sa topic nung vaccine card and the tech issue. No? If you're saying, for example, that other LGUs, especially in remote areas, of course, will have a hard time setting up their own online system, can we just at least focus on Metro Manila and on NCR? Can we just, why don't we just pick up the best practices of any LGU right now and replicate that so that at least NCR, kahit man lang dito, diba, meron ng interoperability, meron ng database, kahit man lang dito muna. Total, for a long time during the surges, NCR was the epicenter, right? So why can't we at least manage NCR?
I cannot speak for the technical geeks working on it, but I do understand, yes, they are concentrating on this major area. The NCR, the major cities in the other provinces, and areas where people movement are a number of people are moving. So kung doon sila magko-concentrate and they capture all of this data, then we'll have a good database to work with, particularly for the areas where people's movement are much more robust or much more aggressive.
How much of an improvement do you think will that give us? For example, if we had the database, kasi si Secretary Duque was saying that there's now 3.5 million vaccinees in the database, and yung 18 million daw na at least first one vaccine pa lang, one dose pa lang, ay baka matapos na nila very soon, perhaps in another 3 or 4 weeks. At least that's how he measures it. If that happens, what can you give us an idea of how much easier life can be? Will it allow us to really normalize?
The benefit of having a validated system where vaccine cards are trusted and authenticated, pag titiwalaan na ng mga border controls, hindi ka na magpapatest. Pagkakatiwalaan ka na. So you don't have to be subjected. In fact, Baguio is already implementing it to a certain extent. They have a cap on number of outsiders or tourists coming into the city at about 3,000 per day. And they don't require any test anymore for those who can show their vaccine card. So it's just a matter of trust, I think, that they placed on the system, that those who show cards, that they have lot numbers there indicated, and then may pirma yung nurse na inoculate. So I think that's enough for them. So they allow all of these vaccinees who have finished their doses to come in without the benefit of any kind of test. But for those who don't have, particularly yung mga bata, nire-require pa rin nila ng some form of test.
Yeah, but,
so yun yung benefit ng movement.
But sir, in the case of Baguio, I'm just curious, how do they do it? I mean, we go back to the basic question even of Secretary Duque yesterday. How does Baguio know na yung vaccine card na pinakita ko from Quezon City or Taguig or Mandaluyong or Manila is actually authentic? Ano po yung sistema nila? Ano yung interoperability on the level of Baguio, in other words?
So, walang electronic counter check yun. Kaya binanggit ko, it's a matter of trust. So, pinagkakatiwalaan nila na yung nagpe-present, hindi niya pinepeke yung kanyang vaccine card. So, meron siyang secondary layer of check kasi nagtatriage pa rin sila dun sa may pagpasok. So, hindi ka pa rin pwedeng dire-diretsong pumasok. So, yun yung secondary guard nila na maaari nilang gamitin para i-counter check yung condition ng tao. So, I guess that's the way they do it.
General, the business talking about, are talking about micro herd immunity. Ano pong activities ang pwede within that kind of environment? Pwede na ba yung magtanggal ng mga mask, for example? Pwede na silang magsama-sama in a larger group? Anong ibig sabihin?
Yung sa working environment ng mga factories, example, kung lahat ng workers doon, sigurado na kayong 2 weeks after ng second dose nila, lahat na sila, because they qualify now as fully vaccinated individuals, then technically, they have the protection or the level of protection needed to keep all of themselves safe and keep them away from hospitals or from becoming a serious case of COVID. So, pwede sila mag-ease na doon na hindi na sila siguro mag-face shield initially, tapos dahan-dahan, pagka wala talagang kaso at 0 cases sila, pwede na silang mag-work sa kanilang work environment na hindi ganun ka-stricto ng katulad ng dati.
Pero yung mask, up to the management yun,
Yes. Kaya nga sabi ng mga experts, they still recommend mask wearing even in the home, especially when you have elderly members of the family who are not yet inoculated. Kasi yung percentage ng seniors natin, mababa pa rin. That's why we're encouraging the vaccination of our senior citizens. And some LGUs are thinking of doing house-to-house already just to reach to their senior citizen population so that they can get them vaccinated.
Sir, si Secretary Duque was telling us yesterday na yung decision on whether or not to require PCR testing for interzonal travel was on hold at least until matapos yung consultation niya with the League of Provinces, which was supposed to be today, with Governor Presbyterio Velasco and Governor Cua, and I think with the Mayor Singson. I'm wondering lang kung may resulta na yun eh. Kasi a lot of people are waiting for the final word on what the decision will be.
We don't have the results yet. I'm not sure if it's still ongoing. Pero everyone is closely awaiting those kinds of discussions, especially after hearing from some LGUs na ayaw nilang tanggalin yung kanilang border control.
Well, General, we know you're very busy. We appreciate every minute, every moment that you allow and you oblige us with. Maraming salamat po sa oras ninyo.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat din, Robbie. Can I just make mention that some of us are comparing the conditions of the Philippines to other countries. So, hindi po pwedeng ganon kasi sa Amerika, sa ibang lugar, taas na po ng vaccination accomplishment nila. Sa atin, pumapalo po lang po tayo sa 4 going to 5%. So, we cannot compare ourselves. So, the gradual easing must really come when most of us are fully vaccinated. So, that's just one thing I can add. Thank you very much for the invitation and I hope I helped clarify something.
Maraming salamat po. Major General Restituto Padilla, spokesperson for the National Task Force Against COVID-19. And that's all for this special edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to everyone, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.
the government of Japan and the Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga prioritize the safety and quality of all vaccines that we are distributing across the country. Our health authorities are also actively collaborating